Hey there everyone, Ramesh here, back again with another crash course titled React.js Crash Course. In this crash course, we will learn all the fundamentals of React.js. Well, you will learn what is React.js, the component, what is component types, JSX, functional components, class components, event handling, conditional statements, JSX, and states, props. Alright, so this crash course covers all the fundamentals of React.js and most importantly why you want to use the latest version of React.js in this crash course. Alright, and end of this crash course I am going to provide you the PDF notes of this crash course so that you can go ahead and refer it anytime. So this is the PDF notes of this crash course. You can use it for your reference and I am going to provide the location of this PDF notes at the end of this video. And if you are new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit notification button. Never miss the updates. Alright, do support this video, give thumbs up so that this video will reach a larger audience. Alright, so without further ado, let's kickstart this crash course. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, let us take a look into Introduction to React.js. Well, what is React.js? React.js is an open source JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Well, here in this definition, you can notice two key points. First is JavaScript library and second is building user interfaces. Well, React is a JavaScript library. It is not a framework. It is a JavaScript library, and React, it does only one thing, that is building user interfaces. So React is not concerned with other things like routing or making REST API calls. Okay, so React, it does one important thing, that is building user interfaces. Okay, so you might be wondering how we can implement the routing and making a HTTP request in a React application, right? So React.js has a good support with third-party libraries. So we can use third-party libraries in a React application to achieve all this stuff. Like we can use React Router DOM library to implement the routing. We can use Axios HTTP library to make the REST API call or HTTP request in a React application. Okay, so just remember, React.js is an open source JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Next, React.js is created and maintained by Facebook. Next, React.js is a component-based architecture, and this architecture promotes reusability. The components are reusable building blocks that encapsulates the logic and UI elements of the application. They allow developers to break down the complex UI into smaller manageable parts. Well, in React.js, the components are building blocks and reusable. And these components allow developers to break down a complex user interface into smaller manageable parts. For example, consider we have user interface over here, and the component-based architecture basically allows the developers to break down the user interface into smaller manageable parts. For example, we can break this user interface into small manageable parts called components. For example, we can have a header component, we can have a footer component, we can have a side navbar, we can have a main content component, we can have a ads component. So React provides a component-based architecture, and this architecture allows the developers to break down the user interface into smaller and manageable parts, and these parts are called components. Okay, and again, component-based architecture promotes the reusability. For example, we can reuse the existing component as many times as we want. For example, here we have a side navbar component, and we can reuse this side navbar component as a left side navbar component or right side navbar component. So one more example is ads component. So we can use this ads component to display multiple ads. Next, let us take a look into React Virtual DOM. Well, React.js uses Virtual DOM as an abstraction of the real DOM to optimize and efficiently update the user interface. So if you look at the diagram over here, so before deep dive into the React Virtual DOM, first let us understand what is real DOM. Well, DOM stands for Document Object Model, and this DOM basically represents a tree structure of your UI application. For example, whenever you load your application in a browser, then browser will create a DOM for your UI application. For example, let us say your UI has a HTML code, div, within a div, S3 element, and then form, and then spam, within a spam, you display the time. Okay, so DOM basically represents a tree structure of your HTML. Now we understood what is DOM and how this DOM looks in a browser. Next, let us understand what is React Virtual DOM. Well, React creates a virtual copy of the real DOM and it is called a virtual DOM. Okay, so in order to improve the performance of the application, React creates a virtual DOM to update only the necessary part of the DOM. Alright, now let us understand how the React virtual DOM works. Well, initially React will create the virtual DOM. It is the virtual copy of the real DOM, the real DOM which is present in a browser. Okay, next let us say if we change something in the React application, for example let us say we change the time, then what React will do, it will create one more virtual DOM and this is what the updated virtual DOM. Okay, next React will compare both virtual DOMs. Okay, so React will basically compare initial virtual DOM and updated virtual DOM and it will identify the changes. If you look at the next diagram, React compares the initial virtual DOM and updated virtual DOM and it will identify the node that gets changed. For example, in this case the time node changed. Okay, so basically in a DOM each element represents a node. Alright, and React compares both the virtual DOMs and it will identify the node that gets changed. So once React identified the node that gets changed, next React will update that change in an actual DOM. And if you look at here, only the node whose data changes get repainted in the actual DOM. Alright, so this is how the React virtual DOM works. So basically React don't change the actual DOM in the browser. It maintains the virtual copy of the actual DOM and it will identify only the necessary changes and then it will update the actual DOM. So this will improve the performance of the application. Okay, so here are some of the React real world examples. React JS is used by numerous organizations and it is a foundation of many popular applications and websites including Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Netflix. Alright, so this is a quick introduction to React JS. In next lecture, we will create and set up React application and we will start learning React JS fundamentals. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to create and set up our first React application. Well, in order to create and set up React application, we are going to use build tools. Well, there are two popular build tools out there to create and set up the React application, such as Create React App and Vite JS. Well, in Java, we use the build tools like Maven or Gradle to create and set up the Java projects, right? Similarly, in order to create and set up the React application, we can use the build tools like Create React App or Vite JS. Well, let us first take a look into Create React App. Well, Create React App is an official supported way to create a single page React applications. It offers a modern build setup with no configuration. Create React App is a built-on Webpack and Bubble, and it is a popular tool that enables developers to quickly set up the React application. Well, Create React App provides a pre-configured environment so that developers can focus on the coding part, not on the build setup and the configuration. Alright, and Create React App is especially useful for beginners to get started. Next, let us take a look into Vite JS. Well, Vite is a newer build tool that has gained popularity in recent years. It was created to address the limitations of existing build tools, particularly in the development phase. Well, Vite JS is built on top of Rollup Bundler, which is known for its faster build times. Vite also provides a development server that is optimized for performance. Well, nowadays React developers prefer using Vite JS as a build tool to create and set up the React applications because Vite provides a faster build times. It means we can use Vite JS to bundle or build the React application very faster. Vite also provides the development server that is optimized for the performance. It means if you change something in the React application, then development server will immediately pick up that change and it will update the DOM in a HTML. Alright, so Vite you can use to improve the development experience. Okay, now the question is which build tool we have to use to create and set up the React application. Well, both Create React App and Vite are excellent build tools that provide the developers with a solid foundation for building React applications. Create React App is a reliable choice for beginners to learn, while Vite is a better choice for real-world projects that require faster build times. Ultimately, the choice between two will depend on the project's requirements and the developer's preferences. Well, in this course, I am going to show you how to create and set up the React applications using both Create React App and Vite JS. So, we'll begin with using Create React App tool to create and set up the React application, and in upcoming sections we'll also see how to use Vite JS to create and set up the React applications. Now let us go ahead and let us use Create React App Build tool to create and set up the React application. Well, in order to create the React application, you need to install Node.js and npm. Well, if you just type Node.js in the browser and go to download page, and from here you can go ahead and download the Node.js as per your operating system, and you can install in your operating system. Next, you don't have to install the npm separately. Whenever you will install the Node.js, npm will also get installed. Okay. Next, you need a text editor. Well, in this course we are going to use Visual Studio Code ID to build the React applications. Well, you can just type Visual Studio Code in a browser and click on the first link and click on download link over here. So from here you can go ahead and download the Visual Studio Code ID as per your operating system, and then you can go ahead and install it. Okay, so make sure that before creating the React applications you have to install Node.js and Visual Studio Code ID in your machine. Alright, great. Next, let us go ahead and let's create the React application using Create React App tool. Well, first of all, let's create the workspace. For example, here in my file system I have created React workspace as a folder. Within this folder we are going to create the React applications. Alright, next let us open the Visual Studio Code ID. Well, I have already installed the Visual Studio Code ID, so here let me open it. Next, let me maximize this and go to file menu, click on open folder over here, and then go to the folder. So in my case I have created React workspace as a folder, so let me select it, click on open. Alright, perfect. Next, we are going to create the React application in this React workspace folder. So in order to create the React application, we are going to use the commands. Well, if you go to browser and in a new tab, just type Create React App, hit enter, click on the first link and click on get started over here, and you can see, so these are the couple of commands that we can use to quickly create and set up the React application using Create React App Build tool. Alright, so let us execute these commands. So in order to execute these commands, we have to use the terminal, right? So let's go back to Visual Studio Code ID here, and here we are going to use inbuilt Visual Studio Code ID terminal. For example, go to terminal, click on new terminal, and here let us execute the command. So if you go back to browser, the command npx create react app followed by the application name. Next, let's go back to VS Code and go to terminal, and here just type the command npx followed by create react app followed by the application name. So let us give application name as React Basics. Next, hit enter. So this will take a couple of seconds to create and set up the React application. So let us wait a couple of seconds, and you can see the statement creating a new React app in this folder. Alright, perfect. And there we go. The React application is successfully created with the name React Basics. Well, if you go to React Workspace folder, within that React Basics is the React application name. Next, in order to run the React application, we can use the command npm start. And in order to build the React application for production, you can use the command npm run build. In order to execute the test, you can use the command npm test. In order to eject the React application, you can use npm run eject. Next, let us type these two commands to start the React application. Right now we are in a React workspace, so let us move into our React application. So here let me clear the terminal and just type the command cd react basics, next npm start and then hit enter. And there we go. Our React application is up and running in a development server on port 3000. Next, let's go to browser. In a new tab, just type localhost :3000 and there we go. Our React application is up and running. Next, let's go back to VS Code and go to our project and go to app.js, and here let us remove all this code, and here just type h1 element and then type hello world and just save this file. And let's go back to browser, and you can see hello world is displayed in the browser. Okay, so in next lecture what we'll do, we'll understand the important files and folders of this React application. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture we have created and set up the React application. In this lecture we are going to understand React application project structure. Well, if you go to VS Code and go to our React application over here, so here let us take a look into the important files and folders of our React application. Well, let us begin with package.json file. So basically package.json file contains all the dependencies and scripts required for our React application. For example, if you go to dependency section, here you can see the dependencies like React, React DOM, and in this course we are using React 18+. Alright, next here we have script section. So this script section contains all the scripts that are required to start the React application, to build the React application, to test the React application, and to eject the React application. Alright, so just remember, package.json file contains all the dependencies and scripts required for our React application. And whenever we run npm install command, then npm will refer this dependency section and it will install all these dependencies in a node_modules folder. Next we have public folder. Within the public folder we keep all the files that are accessible publicly, and within the public folder you can see the important file, that is index.html. Well, we basically create the single page React applications, right? And in single page React application we can find only one HTML file named index.html. And if you look at the index.html code over here, and especially if you look at the body contains a div with id root. So this div is responsible to render the React component. Alright, so this div is responsible to render the React root component. And most of the time we don't change this index.html file content. We may change this header section to include the scripts and CSS files, but we don't touch the body section. Okay, so the body should contain a single div, and this div is responsible to render the React component. Next we have src folder. Within src folder all the development related stuff goes, and within src folder we have app.js file. So this app.js file contains a root component named app component. Next we have index.js file. So this index.js file is a main entry point for our React application. And if you look at the source code of this file, react DOM.create root and then document.getElementById and then id root. Well, this create root method will get the div by using the id root. Well, if you go to index.html file, it contains a div with id root. Alright, and if you go back to again index.js, so here this react DOM.create root method will get the div by using this id, that is root. Okay, and then it will render app component within that div. For example, let me repeat again. If you go to index.html file, it contains the body and body has a div with id root. Next, this react DOM.create root method will get the div from this index.html by using its root id, and then it will render this app component within that div. Okay, next we have app.css and index.css files. So these files basically contains all the CSS related stuff. Okay, so these are the important files and folders in our React application. Now let us understand the flow in our React application. Well, whenever we access the React application from the browser, then this index.html file will get served in the browser. Next, the index.js file will load into the browser. Well, if you go to src folder, go to index.js. So index.js is a main entry point for our React application, right? So once the index.html file will load into the browser, then immediately this index.js file will also load into the browser, and then this piece of code will execute. Well, if you look at the code over here, react dom.createRoot. So this method will get the div from the index.html file by using the id root. Next it will render this app component within the div. Well, if you go to app component contains this HTML code. Well, don't bother about this HTML code right now. So this is basically called a JSX. We'll understand what is JSX and how we can write the JSX code in upcoming lectures. So just as of now, understand this is the app component and it returns some HTML code, and you can see the HTML code h1 hello world. So this will basically print the heading in the web page. For example, if you go to browser, and you can see hello world is displayed in the browser. Okay, and next, if you can inspect this web page, go to console. So here you can see download the React Dev Tools for a better development experience. Just go ahead and click on this link, and let us add this React Developer Tools extension in the Chrome browser. So next, so here I am using Chrome browser, so I am going to install this extension in a Chrome browser. But if you are using Firefox or Edge, then accordingly you can add the extension. So here just click on install for Chrome, and next click on this add to Chrome button, and then click on this add extension. Alright, perfect. Next go to this extensions, and here you can see React Developer Tools extension is added. Alright, great. Next let's go back to our project, and here let us inspect this page again and then refresh, and here you can see the new tab named components. So just click on this components tab. So under this tab you can see all the React components. As of now there is only one component named app component, right? And just click on this app component, and here you can see the details. So this app component is used in a source file named index.js. Next, this app component will be rendered by this method. Okay, so basically you can see all the component related information over here. Alright, so this React Developer Tools extension is pretty useful to track the components and the component tree. Okay, great. Well, notice here by looking into this components tab, we can clearly understand the React application flow. Well, whenever we access the React application using browser, then the index.html file will get served, and then this index.js file will get loaded, and this index.js file is a source for this app component. Okay, so just remember, whenever we access the React application from the browser, then the index.html file will get first served in the browser, and then index.js file will get loaded in the browser, and then this index.js file will render the app component. Okay, so this is how the flow goes in a React application. So let me summarize what we have understood in this lecture. We pretty much understood the important files and folders in the React application, and we have also installed React Developer Tools extension in a Chrome browser, and we have also understood the flow in the React application. Alright, great. In next lecture we will take a look into the components. Well, the components are the building blocks in a React application, so you have to understand the components in order to build the React applications. Alright, so in next lecture we will take a look into React components. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In next couple of lectures we will take a look into what are the components in React and different types of components in React. Well, what is a component? A component is an independent, reusable code block which divides the user interface into smaller pieces. Well, let us understand with an example. Well, consider we have user interface, and we can divide this user interface into smaller components. For example, header component, footer component, side navbar component, main content component, and ads component. Alright, and finally these components will come together to create a complete user interface. And notice here I have mentioned component is a reusable. Reusable means we can use the existing component as many as times we want in a React application. For example, here we have side navbar component, and we can reuse this side navbar component as a left side navbar or right side navbar. We just have to change the information and properties. The rest of the code remains same in a component. Alright. Next, the components can be nested inside other components. For example, here we have app component as a root component, and this app component is nested the other components like header component, footer component, side navbar component, and so on and so forth. Alright, so just remember, components can nested other components as well. Next, in React there are two types of components: functional components and class components. In next lecture we will take a look into what is functional component. Alright, great, I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture we are going to take a look into functional components. Well, in React there are two types of components: functional components and React components. In this lecture we will take a look into functional components, and in next lecture we will take a look into class components. A functional component is basically a JavaScript function or ES6 arrow function that returns a React element. Well, here React element is nothing but a JSX code. Well, we will understand what is JSX and how to write a JSX code in upcoming lectures. So just try to understand, React element is nothing but a JSX code, and JSX allows us to write HTML code inside a JavaScript code. Next, functional components always starts with a capital letter. So this is the important naming convention. Whenever you create a functional component, make sure that the functional component should start with capital letter. Next, functional component takes props as a parameter if necessary. Well, this props is optional. If you want to pass the data from one component to another component, then we can use this props. Alright, next let us go ahead and let us understand about this functional component with examples. So here let's head over to the VS Code, and here go to SRC folder. Within that, let's create a new folder and let's call it as components. Next, within a components folder, let's create a new file and let's give name as welcome.js. Well, you can give the extension for this file as a JS or JSX. Well, some of the developers prefer using JS as extension, and some of the developers prefer using JSX as a file extension. Well, you can use either one because React supports both, right? So here in our case, let us use JS as an extension, but in upcoming React projects we are going to use JSX as an extension as well. Alright, hit enter. Now we have created welcome.js file. Next, within a welcome.js file, let's create a functional component named welcome. So here, look at here the syntax: function. Well, as I mentioned earlier, functional component is nothing but a JavaScript function or ES6 arrow function that returns a JSX. Okay, so here let's create a function and followed by the name welcome. And notice here again, as per the naming convention, the functional component should start with a capital letter, and I have given the capital letter W. Okay, so as this is a function, so here let us have open close braces and open close curly braces. Next, this function returns a JSX code. Well, JSX is nothing but a JavaScript extension that allows us to write a HTML code within a JavaScript code. Well, this is the JavaScript function, right? So within a JavaScript function, we can write the HTML code like this. Let us say we want to print the heading welcome Ramesh. Okay, so this is the JSX code. Well, JSX is nothing but a JavaScript extension that allows us to write HTML code within a JavaScript code. So in next upcoming lectures, we'll understand more about JSX. As of now, just understand JSX is nothing but a JavaScript extension that allows us to write HTML code within a JavaScript code. Okay, perfect. Now we have created simple functional component named welcome component. Next, in order to use this component in other components, we have to export this component. For example, here just type export default and then component name welcome. Well, just remember, in order to use this functional component in other components, we have to export this component first, like this. Okay, next let's go to app.js file and let us import this component. So go to app.js, go to app root component, go to div, and here let us remove this h1 element, and here let us use welcome component. So here just type welcome and make sure that this welcome component is imported at the top, and let us close this welcome component over here. Alright, so this is how we use the component inside other component. And notice here the important point, we have exported this welcome component using export keyword, and we have imported this welcome component in an app component using import keyword. Alright, so this is basically ES6 module feature. We can export the component using export keyword, and we can import the component using import keyword. Alright, great. Next, let us save this file and let's go back to browser, and here you can see welcome Ramesh. Alright, so this is how we can create the functional component and we can use in other components. And again I have mentioned like component is a reusable. Reusable means we can use this component as many times as we want. For example, if you go to app component, and here we can reuse this component many times. For example, here let me use one more time and just save this file and go back to browser. You can see welcome Ramesh. Okay, so this is how the component is reusable in a React application. Alright, perfect. Next, let's go to welcome.js file. So, and if you go to presentation, a functional component is basically a JavaScript function or ES6 arrow function. Well, here we have created this functional component using JavaScript function, but we can also create this functional component using ES6 arrow function. So let us go ahead and let us rewrite this functional component using ES6 arrow function. So here let me copy this and let me paste it over here, and let me comment out this. So here let me show you how we can convert the JavaScript function into arrow function. So in case of arrow function, the function keyword is not required, and in case of arrow function we should have a variable const welcome and then flat arrow symbol. So this is the arrow function. Okay, next, if the arrow function contains a single statement, then we can remove the open and close curly braces and also the return keyword. For example, let us simplify this. Just remove this open and return keyword and also the close curly braces. Alright, so this is the functional component using arrow function. Alright, next let us save this file and let's go back to browser, and you can see welcome Ramesh. If you refresh, you can see the same output, welcome Ramesh. Alright, so this is how we can use the JavaScript ES6 arrow function to create the functional component. Alright, so functional component is a JavaScript function or ES6 arrow function that returns a JSX. JSX is nothing but a JavaScript extension that allows us to write HTML code within a JavaScript code. Next, in order to use this component, we have to first export it using export keyword. Next, we have to import this component using import keyword, and then we can use in the other components like this. Next, functional component takes props as a parameter if necessary. Well, here we can use props to transfer the data from one component to another component, especially from parent component to child component. For example, here we have app component as a parent component and welcome as a child component. And here, let us say we want to transfer the data from app component to welcome component. Then we can use props. So props stands for properties, and we can pass the properties from parent component to child component. For example, here go to welcome, and here just type name and then give name as Ramesh. Okay, next we want to get this Ramesh in a welcome component. So go to welcome component, and in order to get the Ramesh in a welcome component, we have to use props. So here we can pass props as a parameter to this functional component. And next, in order to access these props, we can use open close curly braces. So here just remove this Ramesh and let's have open close curly braces and then type props and then name. Okay, so this is how we can use props to transfer the data from parent component to child component. Next, let's go back to app.js, go to app component. Next, here also let us use the name and let us pass the name. For example, let's say Umesh. Okay, so this is how we can use the props to dynamically pass the data from one component to another component, especially from parent component to child component. Okay, next let us save this file. Let's go back to browser, and here you can see welcome Ramesh, welcome Umesh. So here we are passing the data dynamically to the component. For this first welcome component we are passing name as a Ramesh. For this second welcome component we are passing name as a Umesh, and in a welcome component we are getting that name using props. Okay, so this is all about functional components. In next upcoming lectures we will understand more about props, like how we can pass the object or array and how we can get that object and array using props. We'll understand more about props in upcoming lectures. Alright, great. In next lecture we'll take a look into class components. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture we have understood how to create a functional components in a React application. In this lecture let us understand how to create class components in a React application. Well, class components are ES6 classes that return the JSX. Class components extend the component class from React library. In case of naming convention, class components always starts with a capital letter. Class component takes props if needed. Class component must have a render method for returning the JSX. Well, let us go and let us understand all these points with an example. Alright, so as per these points, let's create the class component. So let us head over to VS Code ID over here, and look at here. I am using VS Code and browser simultaneously in the same window, so that whatever the changes I do in the React application, that will be reflected in the browser right here. Okay, so this is the good way to teach. So here I am using browser and Windows simultaneously in the same window. So in order to understand the class components, let's create a new file. So here go to src folder, go to components folder, and within that let's create a new file. Let's call it as greeting.js. Next let me maximize this. Next, within a greeting.js file, let us create a class component. Well, as I mentioned, class components are ES6 classes that return the JSX. So here just type class and then followed by the component name greeting, and in case of naming convention, the class component should start with the capital letter, right? So you can see the G is capital over here. Next, the class component should extend the component class from the React library. So here let us have extend keyword and then react dot component, and make sure that this react should be imported from the React library. So in order to import that, let us have an import statement, import react from React library. Alright, perfect. Next, this class component should have a render method to return the JSX. So here let us have a render method, and within a render method we can have a return statement, and then we can have a JSX code. For example, here let us have h1 element, and then let us say welcome Ramesh. Okay, perfect. Now we have created a class component. Next, in order to use this class component in other components, we have to export this class component. So here export default and then component name, that is greeting. Perfect. Next, let us use this greeting component in an app component. So go to app.js file, and here let me comment out this welcome component, and here let us use greeting component. So here greeting, and make sure that greeting component is imported at the top. Alright, perfect. Next, save this file and look at here the changes in the browser. Welcome Ramesh. And if you go to the greeting component, you can see welcome Ramesh. So this is the heading displayed in a browser. Next, if I change from Ramesh to Umesh and save the file, and you can see the changes in the browser, welcome Umesh. It means we have successfully created the class component. Okay, so look at here the syntax again. Class components are ES6 classes, and class component should extend a component class from a React library, and the class component should have a render method to return the JSX code. Alright, and in order to use the greeting class component in other components, we have to export it using export keyword, and in order to import these greeting components in other component, we have to use import keyword. Next, this greeting component is reusable, so we can use this greeting component as many times we want in the React application. For example, here let me use greeting component one more time, and you can see the changes. Welcome Umesh. Okay, next we can use props to transfer the data from parent component to child component. So in our case, app component is a parent component, greeting component is a child component, isn't it? So from app component we can pass the data to the greeting component, and we can access that data by using props. For example, here let us use name property and then pass the data, let us say Ramesh, and for this greeting component also let us use name property and then let us use name Umesh. Perfect. Next, in order to access this information we can use props, right? So let us go back to greeting component over here, and here we are using class component, so the props will automatically available in this class component. We don't have to pass props to this render method. Okay, so here let us remove this Umesh and let us get the data dynamically by using props. And in order to access the props we have to use open close curly braces and then this dot props. So look at here, in a class component props will automatically available. We don't have to pass props to the render method. So just access this props and then the property name. So notice here we are using this name property in an app component to assign the data, and we are using the same property to retrieve the data from the props. Okay, so this is how we can use props to transfer the data from one component to another component, especially from parent component to child component. Next, let us quickly summarize the component types. We create a functional component using JavaScript or ES6 arrow function that returns a React element. For example, here we have welcome functional component that we have created using JavaScript function, and this welcome component returns a JSX code. Next, we can also create a functional component using ES6 arrow function like this. For example, here we have welcome functional component that is created using ES6 arrow function. And on the other hand, here we have a class component that is created using ES6 class, and whenever we create a class component, that component should extend the class component from React, and this class component should use a render method to return the JSX code. Okay, so this is how the difference between functional component and class component. Next, you may have a question like which component type is recommended to use. Well, React team recommend to use functional components to build the user interfaces, and most of the React developers prefer using ES6 arrow functions to create the functional components. Well, in this course also we are going to follow the same. We are going to use functional components to build the user interfaces. Alright, so whenever you work on React projects, make sure that you use functional components to build the user interfaces and try to use ES6 arrow functions to create the functional components. Alright, great. In next lecture we will see how to import and export components in a React application. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll take a look into how to import and export the components in a React application. Well, here are the important points. We can export the component using export keyword, and we can import the component using import keyword. And there are two types of exports, named export and default export. We can have multiple named exports in a single file. We can have only one default export per file. We can import named export using curly braces, and we can import default export without curly braces. So let us understand these points with an example. So let us go to our VS Code IDE over here, and in order to understand importing, exporting components, let's create a new file. So go to components folder, right click, new file. Let us give file name as my component.js. Within a my component.js file, let's create a functional component. So here just type function, and let us give component name as first component, and then here let us have a return statement, and then return the heading first component. Okay, and just save it. Next, in order to use this first component in other component, we have to export this first component, right? So here let us have export. So this export is basically called a named export. Okay, and if we export something like this, export default post component, so this is called a default export. Okay, if we use export default keyword, then this is called a default export, and the earlier one, that is this one, is called the named export. Okay, and within a single JS file we can have multiple named exports. For example, here let me create one more component. So let me copy this, paste it over here, and let us give name as second component, and just change the content second component. Alright, just remember, within a single JavaScript file we can create a multiple functional components and we can export them using named export. But if you want to export the functional component as a default export, then you should have a single component in a single JavaScript file. Okay, for example, if you want to export this first component as a default export, then you should have only one component per file. Okay, and you should remove this named export and you should give a default export like this: export default and then the component name. Alright, just remember, if you want to export a component as a default export, then you should have only one default export component in a single file like this. Okay, perfect. Next, let us see how to import the named export and default export. So here let me undo it and let me first show you how to import the named export. So here we have created first component, second component, and we have exported these components as a named export. Next, let us see how to import these two components. So let us go to app.js file. Now let us see how to import the named exports. Well, if you go to my component.js file, so here we have exported first component, second component using named export. Next, let us see how to import these two named exports. So go to app.js, and in order to import the named export components, here we have to use import keyword and then open and close curly braces and then post component from my component file. Okay, so whenever you want to import the named export component, then you should have to use the open and close curly braces like this. Next, here let us use it. So here just type first component and close it, and then show this file, and here you can see in a browser first component is displayed. Similarly, if you go to my component.js file, here we have a second component and we have exported this second component using named export. So let us see how to import this second component in a app.js file. So here go to import statement, and within curly braces we have already imported post component. Along with that, let us also type second component, and here let us use it, second component. Perfect. And if you look at the browser, second component is printed. Alright, so this is how we import a named exported components in a app component like this. Okay, so make sure that you use open and close curly braces to import the named components. And let us say you want to give a different name to this component, then you can use alias over here. For example, al, and just give fc. Okay, and if you save this file, you will get the error because you have given different name to this component, right? So here instead of first component we have to give fc, and then if you save this file, you can take a look at the browser, first component is displayed. And again, if you want to give alias to second component, you can just type as and then sc. Sc stands for second component, and just remove this second component name and then just type the alias second component. Okay, so this is how you can change the exported component name by using alias. So this is all about how to export and import the components using named export. Next, let us see default export. So go to my component.js file. Here let's create one default export component. So here function and then component name, let us say my component, and let us have return statement, and let us print my component. Next, in order to import this component in another component, we have to export it. So far we have seen how to export the components using named export. Now we are going to see how to export the component using default export, right? So here just type export and then append default. So this is the default export. Okay, so you can prefix the component using export default like this, or you can give this default export at the end like this. Okay, so most of the developers use this kind of syntax. Okay, now we have one default export per file. Next, let us save this file and let us go to app.js file and let us see how to import the default export component. So here let us have import statement, import and then my component from my component.js file. So notice here, while importing the default exported component, we don't have to use the open and close curly braces. But in case of named exports, we are using the curly braces to import it. Next, let us use this my component in an app component. So here go at the bottom and then just type my component and then close it and then just save this file and take a look at the browser. You can see my component is displayed over here. Next, let us say how to give a different name to this my component. Well, in case of named exports, we have used alias to give the different name to the component, right? But in case of default export, we don't have to use the alias. We can simply change the component name itself. For example, here instead of my component, let me give my C and then just save the file and look at here, we got the error because we have given the different name to the component while importing. So here instead of my component, just give MC and then save the file and look at here, my component is displayed in the browser. Well, as I mentioned earlier, there should be only one default export component per file. That's why while importing the default export component, we can give any name that we want because we showed that the file contains only one default export, isn't it? So this is all about the default export. When we create a full stack application using Spring Boot and React, we are going to use these named export and default export a lot. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, let us take a look into JSX. Well, JSX stands for JavaScript XML. JSX allows us to write HTML elements within a JavaScript code. Well, let us create example and let's understand the JSX with all these points. So here, let me head over to the VS Code. In order to understand the JSX, let's create a new file. So go to components folder, right click on components folder, click on new file and let's give file name as hello world.js, and within a hello world.js file, let's create a functional component. So let us use arrow function to create a functional component. So here const and then component name hello world and then parenthesis and then arrow symbol, and here we have functional component body, and this functional component return the JSX code. For example, let us say h1 hello world. Perfect. Next, in order to use this component in other component, we have to export it. So here export default and then hello world. Perfect. Next, go to app.js and here we have app component. So within this app component, let me comment out this and just use hello world component. So here hello world and just close it and make sure that hello world component is imported at the top, and just save this file and look at the browser. You can see hello world is printed. Next, let us understand the JSX. Well, if you go to hello world component This hello world component returns a JSX code. Well, JSX basically allows us to write HTML elements within a JavaScript code. So this is a JavaScript code, and JSX allows us to write this HTML element within a JavaScript code. Alright, so even we can assign this HTML element to a JavaScript variable. For example, here let me create a JavaScript variable. Let us say my element equal to, and let us assign this HTML element as a value to this variable, and just return this JavaScript variable, and just save this file. And if you look at the browser, hello world is printed. Okay, so it means JSX allows us to write HTML element in the JavaScript code like this. Next, let us take a look into next point. JSX makes it easier to write and add HTML elements in a React. Well, without using JSX, we can also create the user interface in a React application. Well, React provides create element method which we can use to create the React element. But this JSX makes it easier to write and add the HTML elements in React. So React team recommended to use a JSX. Okay, so now let me demonstrate how we can create the React element using create element, and how we can replace this code with JSX. So let us go to VS Code, and here let us see how to create the React element using create element method first. So here let me comment out this and go to return statement, and here just call React, and make sure that React is imported from the React library, and this React provides create element method over here, and then we need to pass the HTML element tag name. So in our case h1, and then let us pass second parameter as a null, and then third parameter as a content of this HTML element. So the content is hello world, and just save this file. And if you take a look at the browser, you can see hello world is printed. Well, notice here this is the JSX code and this is the react.createElement code. Which one looks easier? Obviously the JSX code looks easier, right? Because using JSX we can write the code like HTML code, isn't it? But if we use react.createElement, then we have to call this createElement method on each and every HTML element. For example, let us say we want to include this h1 tag within a div, then we have to pass div, and then here we need to again call react.createElement method, and then we need to pass the tag name h1, and then second parameter null, and third parameter the content, that is hello world, and just save this file and look at the browser hello world. And next, same code we can rewrite in the JSX like this. For example, here we can just include this h1 element in a div. Alright. Okay, so if you look at the code again, using JSX we can write this much of code only, but if we use react.createElement method, then we have to write a lot of code. Okay, so this is how the JSX makes it easier to write and add the HTML element in a React. Alright, and React team recommended to use JSX approach instead of this react.createElement approach. Alright, and in this course we are going to use a JSX to create the React element or user interface. Next, let us take a look into next point. JSX will be converted into JavaScript on a browser using transpiler bubble.js. Well, React will convert a JSX into JavaScript that browser understands. Alright, so browser basically does not understand the JSX code, right? So React will convert this JSX into JavaScript using bubble JavaScript library. So once it will convert JSX into JavaScript, then browser will load that JavaScript code in a browser. Alright, so this is how the JSX works in a React application. Next, JSX rules in a React. Well, here I have listed certain rules that we can follow while writing JSX code in a React. The component should return a single React element. Well, let us say you have multiple HTML elements in a JSX, then you have to return one parent React element. For example, so here let me go to Visual Studio Code ID and let me demonstrate that. So here let me remove this, and let us say you have multiple HTML elements in a JSX. For example, return h1, let us say title, and you have one more HTML element, let us say h2, and let us pass subtitle, and then let us say you have a paragraph, and let us call it as paragraph, and let us say you have image. Well, whenever you have multiple HTML elements in a JSX, then you have to wrap all these multiple HTML elements in a single parent HTML element. So most of the time we use div. For example, here let us wrap all these HTML elements in a div like this. Alright, so this is the important point. So whenever you have multiple HTML elements in a JSX, then make sure to wrap all those HTML elements within a single parent HTML element. So most of the time we use div or we use fragment. For example, so here instead of div we can also use the fragment. So this is the empty tag. So this is basically called a React fragment. Okay, so either you can use div or fragment. Next, let us save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, the content is not displayed in a web page. Well, whenever you have multiple HTML elements in a multiple lines, then make sure that you include all these multiple HTML elements in a parenthesis. For example, after this return statement, let us have a parenthesis, and within a parenthesis just copy and paste this code. Okay, now if you save this file and if you take a look at the browser, the content is displayed: title, subtitle, paragraph. Okay, so these are the two important points. So whenever you have multiple HTML elements in a JSX, then make sure that you wrap all these multiple HTML elements in a parent HTML element. Either you can use div or fragment. Next, if you write the HTML code in a multiple lines, then make sure that you keep this HTML code within a parenthesis. Next, let us take a look into next point. To write the HTML on multiple lines, put the HTML code inside a parenthesis. Well, this point I have already demonstrated. Next, use camel case for HTML attributes. To specify the CSS classes for an HTML element, use the class name attribute instead of class attribute. This is because class is reserved keyword in a JavaScript. Well, in order to style the HTML element in a JSX, we have to use class name attribute instead of class attribute, because the class attribute is reserved keyword in a JavaScript. Next, event handlers in a JSX are specified using camel case syntax. For example, on click instead of on click, or on change instead of on change. Well, if you look at the naming convention for this event handler, on click, so this is a camel case, right? But you can see the on click, so this is the HTML attribute. But if you want to use this HTML attribute in a JSX, you have to use the naming convention as a camel case. Next, let me demonstrate these 2 points. So let us go to Visual Studio Code ID over here, and here let us first create the CSS class. So we can create a CSS class within app.css. So go to app.css, and here just type dot, and let us give the class name as title, and then within a curly braces just type color. So let us give title color as a red. Just save this, and let's go back to hello.js, and here in order to add the CSS class to the HTML element, we have to use class name property. For example, here go to h1 element and just type class name, and then pass title CSS class, and then just save this file. And if you look at the browser, title is in red color. Okay, so this is how we can use class name property to add the CSS class. Alright, and if you use class attribute, this will give the error. For example, if you go to browser and here just inspect this page, right click, inspect, and if you go to console, here you can see invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? Alright, so browser will give hint like instead of using class, just use class name in a React. Alright, it means the class is a result keyword in JavaScript. That's why whenever we want to add a CSS class to the HTML element in a React, we have to use class name property like this. Alright, perfect. Next point is event handlers in a JSX are specified using camel case syntax. For example, on click instead of on click. So let us go to Visual Studio Code ID, and here let me remove this image, and here let me add the button, and let us add the handler by using on click attribute. Well, if you can notice here, in a plain HTML we use the attribute that is on click, and if you look at here, the on click attribute in a lowercase. Okay, and same on click attribute we want to use in a JSX, we have to use camel case. For example, here instead of on click, let us type on click, and this on click should be in a camel case. Alright, and next let us pass the event handler name. Let us say handle click. Well, in a plain HTML element, in order to specify the event handler name, we have to use the string. For example, like this. Right, but in JSX we have to include the handler name within a curly braces. For example, like this, handler click. So this is the event handler name. Next, let us use a JavaScript function to handle this handle click. So here just create one JavaScript function handle click, and then just let's have a alert statement. Let us say button clicked, and then just save this file. Alright, and let us give name to the button here. Let us say click, and then save this file. And if you take a look at the browser over here, the click button is visible in the page. Next, go ahead and click on this click button, and there we go, the alert is popped up. It says button clicked. Okay, next click on OK button. Alright, so this is how we can specify the event handler in a JSX using the on click, and the on click should be in a camel case. Okay, perfect. Next, let us take a look into next point, expressions within a curly braces. You can embed JavaScript expressions within a JSX elements by wrapping them in a curly braces. Well, JavaScript expressions can be a variable or an expression. For example, let me demonstrate this. Let's go to Visual Studio Code ID, and here let me create one JavaScript variable. Let us say const name, and let us give name Ramesh. So if you want to use this JavaScript expression in a JSX, we have to wrap this expression within a curly braces. For example, here after this paragraph, let me use one more paragraph, and in order to access this name in this HTML element, we can use open and close curly braces and just pass name. And if you save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, you can see Ramesh is displayed in a web page. Alright, so this is how we can access the JavaScript expression or a variable within a JSX by using open and close curly braces. Next, let us take one more example. Let us say const and then addition 1 plus 2, and then let us use this addition in a JSX by using curly braces. For example, let us use paragraph element over here, and then within a curly braces just call addition, and then save this file. And if you take a look at the browser, you can see 3 is printed. Alright, so JSX will basically execute this expression and it will print the result like this. Alright, great. Next, let us take a look into next rule. JSX follows XML rules, and therefore HTML elements must be properly closed. If an element does not have any children, you can use self-closing tag. For example, if you go to VS Code and if you go to app.js file over here, and if you look at the component, so here we are using hello world component within an app component, and this hello world component don't have any content within it. That's why we have used self-closing tab to close this hello world component like this. Okay, so make sure that whenever you use the component or any HTML element in a JSX, make sure that you close them. Alright, so these are the important rules that you have to keep in mind whenever you work with JSX in a React. So these are the JSX rules I have listed over here as per my experience. So just try to follow these rules to write the JSX code. Alright, great. In next lecture, we'll take a look into the props. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, let us take a look into props. Well, the props is a special keyword in React that stands for properties and is being used to pass the data from one component to another component and mostly from parent component to child component. Alright, so props is a special keyword in React that stands for properties, and we use props to transfer the data from parent component to child component. Next, we can say props is a data carrier or means to transport data. Next, React props is an object which you get instantly when you create a React component. Well, whenever you create a React component, either functional component or class component, you will get a props empty object, and then you can store the properties in a props empty object. Alright, so let us go ahead and let's understand more about props with an example. So let us go to VS Code ID over here. Well, in order to understand props, let us create a new file. So go to components folder over here. Within that, let's create a new file and let's give a name as student.js. Within a student.js file, let's create a functional component, and we are going to use arrow function to create a functional component. So here just type const and let us give the component name student and then parenthesis and then flat arrow symbol, and within a functional component let us write the JSX code. So here let us have a return statement and then parenthesis. Within that, let's have a div as a parent element, and within div let's have a h1 element to give the heading. So let us say student details. Alright, next let us print the student first name. So let us say student first name. As of now, let us hard code it. Let us say Ramesh, and then let us also print the student last name. Let us say Partare, and let us also print student email address. Let us say ramesh@gmail.com. Perfect. Next, let us export the student functional component using default export. So here just type export and then default and then followed by the component name. Perfect. Next, let us go ahead and let us use this student component in an app component. So go to app.js file over here and go to app component, and here let me comment out this hello world component, and here let us use student component and make sure that student component is imported at the top. Alright, next save this file, and if you look at the browser over here, you can see the student first name, last name and email address is printed over. Alright, next let us go ahead and let us see how to use props to transfer the data from app component to student component. Well, as of now you can see the student component, we have hard coded the value first name, last name, email address. Right, now let us use props to transfer the data from app component to student component dynamically. Okay, so go to student over here, and here let us pass the information. So first name is the property name, and let us give value Ramesh, and then last name let us give value as a Partare, and then email let us give value as ramesh@gmail.com. Perfect. Now we have passed the data to the student component. Next, let us use props to access these property values in a student component. So let us head over to student component over here, and in order to use props, we have to pass props as a parameter to this student. So here just pass props. Okay, perfect. Next, let us go ahead and let us retrieve all the properties from the props. So here let us remove this hard coded value Ramesh, and let us have curly braces. Within that, let us call props, and the property name is first name. Alright, so whatever the property name you have given while assigning the data, same property name you have to give. For example, if you go to app.js, you can see here we have given the property name first name. Same property name you have to use while accessing the data from the props. Okay, next let us remove this further array and let us use props and then property name last name. Similarly, let us do it for email as well. So within a curly braces, props dot email. Perfect. Next, let us save this file and let us take a look at the browser. You can see here student first name last name email is printed. Next, let us reuse this student component and let us pass the different data dynamically. So go to app.js and here let us reuse this student component and make sure to close it. Next, let us pass the student data. So here first name, so let us give Umesh, and then last name let us give further, and then email umesh@gmail.com. Perfect. Next, save this file, and if you take a look at the browser over here, the another student, that is Umesh student, is also displayed over here. So this is how we can reuse the existing component and just we need to pass the information. Okay, perfect. Now let us go ahead and let us see how to pass the object from parent component to child component. Now we have passed the string. Next, let us see how to pass the object from app component to student component. So first of all, here let us create the object const student and then first name, let us say Ramesh, last name Padthare, and then email ramesh@gmail.com. Perfect. Next, we need to transfer this student object from app component to student component. So let us see how to do that. So here, first of all, let us remove all this, and here let us give property name as student, and then within a curly braces just pass the object, that is student. Next, let us see how to use props to get this student object in a student component. So before that, let us comment out this code. Alright, perfect. Next, let's go to student component over here, and here we have props. So we should get the student object from this props, right? So here, in order to get the student, so here is the syntax: props dot student is the property name, and then student object has first name attribute. Next, props dot student dot last name, and then props dot student dot email. Well, if you go to app.js, you can see here the property name student, and if you go to student.js, here we are using the same property name. Okay, and the student object has first name last name email, right? So this is how we can use the syntax to retrieve the student object first name last name email. Next, if you save this file and if you look at the browser, you can see the Ramesh student details is displayed over here. Alright, so this is how we can pass the object from parent component to child component using props. Okay, perfect. Next, if you go to app.js file over here, so here let us pass the different student information. Let us say Sanjay, last name Jadhav, and email let us say Sanjay, and just save this file. And if you take a look at the browser, the Sanjay student details is successfully displayed. Alright, perfect. Next, let us see how to use props to transfer the array from one component to another component. So instead of passing the object, let us pass the array. So here let me comment out this, and here let me quickly create the array const, and then let us give the array name as skills, and let us provide the elements in the array. Let us say HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Perfect. Now we have array. Next we need to pass this array to the student component using props. So here what we'll do, we'll just give property name as data and we'll pass skills over here. Perfect. Next let us change the student component to get this skills data using props. So go to student component and here we have props. So let us get the array from this props. So here what I will do, I will comment out this and I'm going to create one more paragraph element. Alright, and here let us say array data and within a curly braces props dot data. Next save this file and if you take a look at the browser you can see array data HTML CSS JavaScript. Alright, so this is how we can pass the array data from one component to another component. Alright, just remember we use props to transfer the data from parent component to child component. Alright, so this is all about props. Alright, great, I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture we pretty much understood about props. In this lecture let us take a look into destructuring props. Well, destructuring was introduced in year 6. It's a JavaScript feature that allows us to extract multiple pieces of data from an array or object and assign them to their own variables. In React, destructuring props improves code readability. Well, there are two ways to destructure props in a functional component. The first way is destructuring it in a function parameter itself. The second way is destructuring props in the function body. So let us go ahead and let us see how to destructure props with an example. So let us go to VS Code ID over here. In previous lecture we have created student functional component to demonstrate the props. In this lecture let us use the same student functional component to demonstrate destructuring props. So here go to the JSX code and here let us uncomment this and here let us remove this student. Just keep props dot first name and props dot last name and then props dot email. Perfect. Next go to app.js file over here and here just comment out this and just uncomment this. Okay, now save the file and if you look at the browser the image student details is printed. Okay, next go to student component over here and here let us remove this array data paragraph element and next save this file and if you look at the browser the image student details is displayed over here. Now let us go and let us see how to destructure these props. Well, there are two ways. First way is we can destructure these props in function parameter itself. For example, here this props contains first name, last name, email properties, right? So here we can destructure like this. So within curly braces just pass first name comma last name comma email. So this is the syntax to destructure the props. Next, while accessing these properties we don't have to use props. For example, here let us remove this props, just keep first name and here remove the props, just keep last name and here also remove props and just keep email and then save this file and if you take a look at the browser you can see student details is successfully printed. Okay, so this is how we can destructure the props in a function parameter itself. Well, here destructuring allows us to extract some of the data from an array or object and assign them to their own variable. For example, here we have extracted first name, last name, email from the props and we have assigned them to its own variable like first name, last name, email and we are accessing these variables over here. So we can also extract only first name, last name from the props by using destructuring like this. If you save this file and here we got email is not defined, so we can simply remove this and you can see Umesh Padhar is printed over here. Well, notice here even though the props object has first name, last name, email, but we are only extracting first name, last name from the props object using destructure feature like this. Alright, perfect. Next let us say how to destructure props in a function body. So here we have destructured props in a function parameter itself. So let us see how to destructure props in a function body. So let us cut this and go to function body and let us have a const and then paste this and then props, and then this props we should pass as a parameter to student. Perfect. Next, if you save this file and if you take a look at the browser, you can see still the student details is printed properly. Next, let us say we want to only extract the first name last name from the props object. Then what we can do is we can simply remove this email, and here also we need to simply remove this paragraph element. Alright, so even though this props has first name last name email, but we are only extracting first name last name from the props object using destructuring feature like this. So basically here we are extracting first name last name from the props object, and we are assigning them to the separate variables, that is first name last name, and we are accessing these variables in a JSX code like this. Alright, so this is how we can destructure the props in a functional components. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, let us take a look into state object and set state method in a class components. Well, the state is an inbuilt object in a React class components. In a state object, we can store property values that belong to that particular class component. When the state object changes, the class component re-renders. We use set state method to change the state object in a class component. Well, notice here we are talking about the class components, not the functional components. Alright, so we can use state inbuilt object in only class components, not in the functional components. Alright, well, let us understand about state object and set state methods with an example. So let's go to VS Code IDE over here, and here let's create a new file. So go to components folder. Within that, let's create a new file. Let's call it as employee.js. Next, within employee.js file, let us create a class component. So before that, let's first import React from React library. Alright, next let us type class. Let us give component name as employee. So this employee component should extends react.component. Okay, perfect. Next, here let us have a constructor. This constructor takes props as a parameter, and then let us have a super and then pass these props to the super class constructor. Next, within a constructor, let us specify the state object. So here just type this dot state, and notice here whenever we create the React class component, then this state inbuilt object is immediately available. Okay, next let us choose state over here, and then within a state inbuilt object we can define the property and its values. For example, here let us say first name as a property and value as a Ramesh. Alright, perfect. Next, let us say how to access this state object and its property is in a JSX code. So after this constructor, let us have a render method, and then let us have a return statement, and then parenthesis, and then let us have a div. Perfect. So within a div, let's have a h1 element, and let's give heading something like employee details. Next, let us have a paragraph element. Next, we want to access the state object property, that is first name, right? So here is the syntax. Within a curly braces, this dot state dot first name. So this is the syntax to access the state object property. Alright, perfect. Next, in order to use this employee component in an app component, we should have to export this component, right? So here let us use default export to export this employee class component. So just type export default and then employee. Perfect. Now we have used default export to export this employee class component. Next, let us use this employee class component in an app component. So go to app.js file over here, and let me expand this, and here let me comment out this student, and here let us use employee component. So just type employee and hit enter and just close it, and make sure that this employee component is imported at the top. Next, just save this file And if you take a look at the browser, you can see Ramesh employee detail is printed over here. And if you go to employee component, you can see we have accessed this first name property from the state object. So this is how we can access the property from the state object. Next, we can have as many as properties and its values in a state object. For example, here let us have a last name property and its value, let us say 43, and we can access this last name property from the state object using the same syntax. So here let us have paragraph element, and then within a curly braces this dot state dot last name. And if you save this file and if you take a look at the browser, the 43 is displayed over here. Similarly, let us also have an email property and then ramesh@gmail.com, and let us access this email property from the state object over here. So let us have a paragraph element within a curly braces this dot state dot email. Save the file, and if you take a look at the browser, the email is displayed. Okay, so this is how we can use inbuilt state object in a class component to define the property and its values. Next, in order to access the state object, we can use the syntax this dot state dot property name. Alright, perfect. Next, let us see how to update this state object using setState method. So here, first of all, let's create one method. Let us say update employee, and then within the update employee method, let us use setState method to update the state object. So here setState, and then within the curly braces first name. So let us update from Ramesh to Ram, and also update the last name from Padatari to Jadhav, and also update the email ram@gmail.com. Next, let us have a button, and whenever user click on that button, then this update employee method will get called. So here go to div, and after that let us have a button over here. Next, let us give name to the button. Let us say update employee. Next, let us attach the event handler to this button. For that, let us use onClick attribute. Well, this is a class component, so we have to call the event handler using arrow function. So within curly braces, just have a arrow function over here. In order to call the event handler, just type this dot, the event handler name, update employee, and then parenthesis. Next, save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, update employee button is visible. Next, let us refresh this and go ahead and click on update employee button over here, and there we go. The employee details successfully updated from Ramesh to Ram, Padatari to Jadhav, Ramesh@gmail.com to Ram@gmail.com. So notice here the code. Once user click on this update employee button, then this update employee event handler will get called, and within this update employee event handler, we have used setState method to update the state object. Okay, so just remember, class component has an inbuilt state object. So within this state object, we can define the properties, and in order to access the inbuilt state object, we can use the syntax like this dot state dot property name, and in order to update the state object, we use setState method like this. So this is all about state object and setState method. Alright, yet I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture, we have seen how to use state object in a class component to manage the state of the component, and we have also seen how to use setState method to update the state object in a class component. Now the question is, only class components has an inbuilt state object, then how to define the state variables in a functional components? Well, the answer is hooks. So we can use state hook to define the state variables in a functional components. Alright, the use state is a hook that allows us to have a state variables in a functional components. Well, here hook is nothing but a function that allows us to use the React features in a functional components. For example, the React features like state object, lifecycle methods and other React features. So just remember, hooks are nothing but a functions that allows us to use React features such as state object, lifecycle methods in a functional components. For example, here we are using useState hook that allows us to use state variables in a functional components. So in order to use useState hook in a functional component, first we need to import useState hook from the React library, and then useState hook is a function that takes initial value as a one argument and it returns the two values. One is the current state and another is a function that updates the current state. Okay, so let us understand the useState hook with an example. So let us go to VS Code IDE over here, and here let's create a new file. So go to components folder and then let's create a new file. Let's give name as user.js. Let's expand this, and here let's create a functional component using arrow function. So just type const, let's give component name as user and then parenthesis and then arrow symbol. Perfect. Next, here let us use state hook to define the state variables. So just type use state and make sure that you import use state hook from React library. So just click on it and notice here use state hook is imported from the React library over here. And again notice here use state hook is nothing but a functional component and it is imported using named export. That's why we have imported using curly braces here. Alright, perfect. So here use state hook is nothing but a JavaScript function and it takes one argument, that is the initial value. So here let us give initial value as empty. Next, this use state hook returns an array. So here let us destructure it. So array, and the first value is the current state. So let us give state variable name as first name. Second value is the function that we can use to update this first name state variable. So here let us give the function name as set first name. So this is the syntax to use state hook. So if you can notice here, use state hook takes initial value as a first argument and this use state hook returns an array, and the array contains exact two values. The first value is current state variable name, second value is the method that updates the current state. Okay, perfect. Next, let us write the JSX code and let us access this state variable in a JSX code. So here what I'm going to do is we're going to have a return statement and then parenthesis and then let us have a div, let us have h1 element and let us give heading as a employee details or user details. Perfect. After that let us have paragraph and then here let us access the state variable using open and close curly braces and then just call first name. Okay, so look at the syntax. In order to access the state variable that is defined by useState hook, we just have to use the syntax like this. Within a curly braces we just need to call the state variable name like this. Okay, perfect. Next, in order to use this user component in app component, we have to export it. So here let us use default export to export this component. So just type export and then default and then user. Perfect. Next, let's go to app.js, go to app component and here let us comment out this employee component and let us use user component. So here user, and make sure that this user component is imported at the top. Alright, perfect. Next, let us save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, user details, and if you again go to the user.js file and go to user component, the initial value for this first name is empty. That's why nothing is displayed here. Okay, so let us give initial value as a Ramesh. Next, if you save this file and if you take a look at the browser, Ramesh is displayed over here. Okay, so this is how we can use useState hook to define the state variable and assign the initial value to this state variable. Next, let us use useState hook to define one more state variable. So here const and then array, let us use state variable name as last name, and then method set last name, and then use state, and then pass the initial value further in. Next, in order to access this last name state variable, here let us have paragraph element within a curly braces, just pass last name. Perfect. Next, save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, further is displayed over here. Similarly, let us define one more state variable using useState hook. So here let us copy this, paste it over here, and let us use state variable name as email, and let us use method name as set email, and here let us use initial value as ramesh@gmail.com, paragraph within a curly braces, just call email state variable, and then save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, email is printed. Okay, so this is how we can use state hook to define the state variables in a functional component. Next, let us see how to update the state variables using the corresponding set methods. For example, here in order to update the first name state variable, we have to use set first name method, and in order to update the last name state variable, we have to use set last name method. In order to update the email state variable, we have to use set email method. Okay, so let us go and let us see how to update these state variables using the corresponding set method. So here let us have one button. Let us give button name as update user. Next, let us attach onClick event to this button. Well, whenever user click on this update user button, then we have to create a event handler method that will handle this update user event, right? So here let us have onClick attribute, and let us pass the event handler name. Let us say update user. Next, let us add the implementation for this update user event handler. Let's create a JavaScript function, and let's give name as update user. Next, within update user method, let us call set first name method to update first name state variable. So right now the first name state variable contains the initial value Ramesh. So let us update the initial value from Ramesh to Ram. So here go to update user method again, and just call set first name, and then pass value as a Ram. Next, just save this file. Next, let us call set last name, and then let us update the last name state variable from Padhatare to Jadhav. Next, let us call set email method, and then pass ram@gmail.com. Perfect. Now we have used set first name method to update the first name state variable. We have used set last name method to update last name state variable, and we have used set email method to update email state variable. Alright, perfect. Next, save this file, and if you go to browser, here you can see update user button is visible. Next, go ahead and click on this update user button over here, and look at here, the user details are updated. Earlier it was Ramesh, now you can see Ram. Okay, and similarly the last name and email also updated. Alright, so this is how we can update the state variables using the corresponding set methods. Okay, perfect. Next, let us see one more example using useState hook. In previous example, we have passed string to the useState hook, but we can also pass the object or array to the useState hook. For example, here let us comment out this, and here let us use useState hook, and let us pass initial value as an object. Okay, and then let us have property first name Ramesh, and then last name Padhatare, and then email ramesh@gmail.com. Perfect. So this is how we can use useState hook to pass the object. Next, this useState hook returns an array with two values. So here let us have a destructuring array, and the state variable let us give user, and the method name is set user. Next, save this file, and go to return statement, go to div, and here we have used first name, last name, email, state variables, but here we are not using these state variables. We are using the user object. It has first name, last name, email properties, right? So in order to access the user object properties, we have the syntax like this: user dot first name, okay, similarly user dot last name, and then user dot email. Okay, perfect. Next, save this file, and if you go to update user method, within that we have used set first name, set last name, set email methods, right? Right now we are not using these methods, so let us comment it out. And if you take a look at the use state hook, in order to update the user object state variable, we have to use set user method. So go to update user again, and here just call set user method, and then let us have its property first name. Let us update the first name from Ramesh to Ram, and then last name property, let us update from Padatari to Jadhav. So either you can use single quote or double quote, and then email ram@gmail.com. Perfect. Next, save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, ramesh@gmail.com. So these user details successfully displayed, and along with that you can see update user button. So go ahead and click on this update user button over here, and there we go. The user details are successfully updated. So this is how we can update the user state object using set user method. Alright, so this is the example that demonstrates how to use state hook to define the user state object as a state variable. Alright, great. So this is all about using use state hook in a functional component. Alright, so just remember, we use state hook to define the state variables in a functional components. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we will see how to perform event handling in a React application. Well, in React, event handling allows you to handle user interactions such as button clicks, form submissions, or mouse movements within your React application. Event handling in React follows similar pattern to standard JavaScript event handling, but with some differences. React events are written in camel case syntax, for example, on click instead of on click. So this on click is a camel case. React event handlers are written in inside a curly braces. For example, here you can see on click within a curly braces, shoot is the event handler name instead of on click, and here we are passing shoot event handler name within a double quote, right? But in React we typically pass the event handler's name within a curly braces like this. Alright, so let us go and let us understand how to perform event handling in React application with an example. So let us head over to VS Code ID over here, and here I am going to create a new file. Go to components folder, within that create a new file. Let's call it as event handling.js. Perfect. Next, let me expand this, let me minimize this, and within a event handling.js file, let's create a functional component using arrow function. So here const, and then let's give functional component name as event handling, and then parenthesis, and then arrow symbol. Next, within a event handling functional component, let us maintain count state variable using use state hook. So here let us call use state hook from React library, and make sure that use state hook is imported at the top. Next, let us destructure it. So here const, and then let us give the state variable name as count, and then the method name set count. Next, let us give the initial value to this count state variable as 0. Okay, perfect. Now we have maintained count state variable using use state hook. Next, let us have a return statement over here, and within a return statement we are going to write the JSX code. So within a parenthesis, let's have a div as a parent element, and within a div, then let us first print the heading by using h1 tag. Let us give the heading something like event handling example, Next, let us use paragraph element over here, and then let us print the current count by using count state variable. So here, in order to access the count state variable in a JSX, we have to use curly braces. So within a curly braces, just pass count state variable name here. Next, let us create a button. Let us give button name as increment, and here let us attach the onClick event. For that, let us use onClick property here, and notice here the React event should be in a camel case. Okay. Next, we need to pass the event handler name within a curly braces. For example, here let us give event handler name as handle click. Okay. So whenever user click on this increment button, then this handle click function will be triggered. So let us implement this handle click function over here. So here just type function and then handle click. Alright. Next, in order to update the count state, we have to use setCount method. So here just call setCount method and then increment the count by 1. So count plus 1. Alright, perfect. Next, here let's create one more button and let us give name as reset, and let us attach onClick event to this button. So let us type onClick, and then let us pass the event handler name within a curly braces, handle reset, something like that. Next, let us implement this event handler over here. So here function and then function name handle reset, and then call setCount method and then pass 0. Well, handle reset function will get triggered when reset button clicked, and this handle reset function will set the count value back to 0 by using setCount method. Okay, perfect. Next, let us save this file, and here you can see we haven't exported this component yet. So let us use default export to export this event handling functional component. So here just type export default and then component name, that is event handling. Perfect. Next, let us open app.js file over here, and within app.js file, let me comment out this, and here let us use event handling component, and make sure that event handling component is imported at the top. Perfect. Just save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, you can see initially the count value is 0 and increment and reset buttons are displayed over here. Next, let us go ahead and click on increment button over here. So look at here, the count value is incremented by 1, and again if you click on increment button one more time, you can see the count value 2. Alright, and if you click on reset button, it will reset the count value back to 0. Okay, it means we have successfully handled the onClick event. Well, here in heading we have a typo, so this should be handling. Perfect. So this is how basically we perform event handling in React. Well, let me recap what we have done. We have created a functional component named event handling. Within this functional component, we have maintained count state variable using useState hook. Next, this handle click function is get called when the increment button is clicked, and this function updates count state by incrementing it by 1 using setCount method, and this handle reset function set the count state value back to 0. Well, in this example we have seen onClick event handling, but in upcoming lectures we'll also take a look into form handling, and within a form handling we'll learn how to perform different events like onSubmit event, onChange event, etc. Alright, so this is how we can perform event handling in React. And just remember the syntax. React events should be in a camel case, for example like onClick, and the event handler should be passed in a curly braces like this. Okay, perfect. I will see you. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll take a look into conditional rendering in React application. Well, conditional rendering in React allows you to render different content or components based on certain conditions or state values. It helps you dynamically control what gets displayed in your UI based on certain conditions. Well, there are different ways to implement conditional rendering. For example, we can perform conditional rendering using if-else statement. We can implement conditional rendering using ternary operator. We can implement conditional rendering using short circuit operator. Alright, so these are the three different ways to implement conditional rendering, and in this lecture we will see all these different ways to implement conditional rendering. So let us begin with conditional rendering using if and else statement. So let us head over to Visual Studio Code IDE over here, and here first of all let's create a new file. Go to components folder. Within that let's create a new file named conditional rendering.js. Next let us maximize this, and here let's create a functional component named conditional rendering. So here let us use const and then conditional rendering is the component name, and then parenthesis and then arrow symbol. Perfect. Next, within a conditional rendering functional component, let us maintain the state variable using useState hook. So here let us use useState hook and make sure that useState hook is imported at the top from React library. And then here let us perform the destructuring. Like let us use the state variable name as is logged in is the state variable name, and let us use the corresponding setter function, that is set is logged in, and then let us give the initial value as a false. Okay, it means user is not logged in. Alright, perfect. Next let us have if else statement over here. If is logged in, then we will return the JSX code. So let us have paragraph element and let us say welcome user. Perfect. Else return please log in. Okay, perfect. Next let us export this component by using default export default and then component name conditional rendering. Perfect. Next let us go to app.js file, and here go to app component, go to return statement, and here let us comment out this and let us use conditional rendering component, and make sure that conditional rendering component is imported at the top. Okay, just save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, please login is displayed. Well, if you go back again to the conditional rendering component over here, you can see initially the is logged in state variable value is false, and if you look at the if else condition, if is logged in is true, then this functional component will return welcome user, and if is logged in state variable has a false value, then it will return please login, and that is what get displayed in a browser. Okay, so this is logged in state variable has initial value false. That's why this functional component will return please login, and this please login is printed over here. And if you pass true over here, for example, and if you save the file and if you take a look at the browser, you can see welcome user is displayed. So this is how we can use if else statement to conditionally render different content. Next, instead of returning, we can assign this HTML code to variable as well. For example, here let us say let message, and then remove this return and then assign this part to message variable, and again here message. Next here let us have return statement, and then let us have a div over here within a parenthesis div, and then here within a curly braces just call message, and then save this file. And if you take a look at the browser, you can see still welcome user is displayed. And if you pass the false value here, and if you save the file, and if you take a look at the browser, you can see please login is displayed. Okay, so this is how you can use if else statement to return the JavaScript variable. It contains the JSX code. Okay, next let us have button over here. So here let me add break element and let us have a button. Let's give button name as login and let us attach the onClick event to this button. For that let us use onClick attribute and let us pass the event handler name handle login. Next let us implement this handle login event handler over here. So here just type function and then handle login, and here let us use set is logged in method to set the value to this state variable. So here let us give value as a true. It means whenever user click on this login button, then this is logged in state variable will be updated with the true value. Okay, perfect. Next let us save this file, and if you take a look at the browser, login button is displayed over here. Next click on this login button, you can see welcome user is displayed. Alright, so this is how we can use if else statement to conditionally or dynamically render the content based on the condition like this. Okay, perfect. Next approach is conditional rendering using ternary operator. So let us go back to VS Code over here and let us use ternary operator to dynamically display the content. So we can use ternary operator within a JSX code itself, but if you can see the if else condition, we are using if else condition outside the JSX code. Okay, but we can use ternary operator within a JSX code itself. Alright, for example here let us remove this, and here within a curly braces just have a ternary operator. So here is the syntax. Just call the current state variable, that is logged in, and then question mark, and then if this is logged in is true, then we'll display welcome user. So just copy this, paste it here. If is logged in false, then we'll display please log in. So just copy and paste it over here. Okay, so this is how we can use ternary operator to reduce some amount of code. So if we use if else, then we need to write this much of code, but if we use ternary operator, then we can write this much of code. Alright, so ternary operator is pretty useful because we can use ternary operator in a JSX code itself to render the content dynamically. Alright, so notice here the ternary operator has a syntax like the variable name and then expression 1 and then expression 2. If the variable is true, then this expression 1 will get evaluated, and if this variable value is false, then this expression 2 will get evaluated. Okay, and in this case this is logged in variable contains true value, that's why this expression is get evaluated, and this is what displayed in a browser. Next let us go to browser over here and let us refresh this, and the initial value for this is logged in state variable is false, that's why you can see please login is displayed over here. Next if you click on this login button, you can see welcome user is displayed. Alright, perfect. Next let us take a look into next approach, conditional rendering using short circuit operator. So let's go to VS Code over here, and here just remove this, and here let us use the short circuit operator and. Okay, it means if is logged in state variable has a value true, then only this expression will get evaluated, otherwise nothing will display in the browser. For example, just save this file, and if you go to browser, just refresh, and you can see nothing is displayed because this is logged in state variable has a value false. If this is logged in variable has a value true, then only it will display this part, otherwise it won't display anything in the browser. Okay, next if you click on login, it will display welcome user because this is logged in state variable has a value true. Okay, so this is how the short circuit operator works. Okay, so whenever you want to display something or nothing, then you can go ahead and use this short circuit operator. Alright, so these are the three different ways to implement conditional rendering in a React. Okay, perfect. I will see you in the next lecture. Hey there everyone, Ramesh here, back again with another video. In this video I am going to show you how to create a React application using Vite tool. Well, earlier we were using create a React app tool to create a React application. But alternative to create a React app, we have one more tool, that is Vite. Well, nowadays React developers prefer using Vite tool to create the React project. So in this video I'm going to show you how to use Vite to create a React project. Well, Vite is a build tool that aims to provide a faster and learner development experience for modern web projects. Well, using Vite we can create the React application faster, and basically Vite bundles the React application very faster. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's see how to create a React project using Vite build tool. Well, here you can see Vite supports two templates, one is JavaScript and another is TypeScript. So using Vite we can create different applications, like we can create JavaScript vanilla project, Vue project, React project, and so on. And we can use Vue to create a different TypeScript applications like vanilla TypeScript, Vue TypeScript, React TypeScript, and so on. In this video I am going to show you how to create a React application with JavaScript template using Vite tool. So let's go to Visual Studio Code IDE. So here I have created Vite workspace folder and I have opened this Visual Studio Code IDE in this folder. Alright, next let us use Visual Studio Code IDE built-in terminal to execute the commands. So here we have a terminal, so click on new terminal over here. Next here just type the command npm. So make sure that you have installed Node.js and npm in your machine, because in order to create the React application using Vite we have to use the npm command. So here npm followed by create and then Vite. So we are going to use a latest version of Vite. So here add latest and then followed by the project name. So here let us say Vite React app, something like that. So this is the command that we can use to create a React application using Vite build tool. Next go ahead and hit enter, and notice here it prompts select a framework. So here we have vanilla, Vue, React. So we are going to use React. So here let us select the React and hit enter, and here we need to choose the template. So we are going to use JavaScript. So here let us select the JavaScript and hit enter, and now you can able to see here the project is created. So if you can see here, within a Vite workspace folder Vite React app application is created. So just expand and here you can see here this is the project structure. Next here you can see couple of commands. So just follow these commands and just run this application. So here just type cd and then followed by the project name, that is Vite React app, and then hit enter. Now we are in a Vite React app application. Next just type the command npm install. So just follow these three commands, okay, and then hit enter. So this will install all the dependencies for our React application. So just wait a couple of seconds. Now we have installed all the dependencies. Next, in order to run the React application, just type the command npm run dev and hit enter, and there we go. Our React application is deployed in a local development server which is running on port 5173. So just copy this URL and go to browser, in a new tab just paste it and hit enter, and there we go. Our React application is up and running. Next let us go ahead and let's quickly understand the project structure for our React application. So here we have package.json file. So within a package.json file you can see all the dependencies. For example, here you can see dependency section, and within that we have a React and React DOM dependencies. Next here we have scripts section, and within that we have different scripts to build the React application, to run the React application, and to preview the React application. And here we have dev dependency section. Alright, and whenever we execute npm install command, then npm install command will download all the dependencies as per the dependency section, and it will create node_modules folder, and it will keep all the downloaded JavaScript dependencies within the node_modules folder. Next we have index.html file. Well, this is the single page React application. So in this React application we have only one HTML file, that is index.html file. And if you can notice here, within this HTML file we have a body, within that we have a div with the ID root. So whatever the components that we are going to create in a React application, that components will be rendered within this div. Alright, next expand src folder, within that we have main.jsx file. So within a main.jsx file you can see we have react dom.create root, and here document.get element by id, and then we have passed the root as a id. Well, in index.html file you can see we have a div with id root, right? And in main.js file you can see document.get element by id, and then this is the root. So whatever the components that we are going to create in a React application, that components will be rendered within this div by using this statement. Okay, right now you can see we have only one component, that is app component. So basically app component is a root component, and we import the other components within an app component. Just remember, this statement is responsible to render the components within a div. It has id root. Next we have app.jsx file. So this file contains an app component. So app component is basically a root component, and this is the default generated code. So we can simply remove this code and we can write our own code. Alright, next let me remove this import as well. This is the unused import. Next we have app.css file. So this file basically contains all the CSS styles. So right now we can remove all this because we are not going to use it. Next we have index.css. So this file also contains all the CSS styles. So let me remove this as well. Next we have assets folder. So within assets folder we keep all the images and other static files. Next we have a public folder. Within a public folder we can keep the static files such as images, svg files, videos, and etc. Alright, so this is a very simple project structure of our React application. Next we have one more important file, that is vite.config.js. So within this file we can configure all the Vite related configuration. For example, right now the development server is running on port 5173, but we can configure different port as well. For example, here let us have a server section, and here we can change the port by using port attribute port 3000. Next let's go to browser, and here you can see this site is can't be reached because we have changed the port. So here let me give the port 3000, and now you can see we can access the React application. So we don't have any content to display, that's why you can see the blank. Next let's create one component. So go to src folder, right click on it and new file, and let's give file name as hello world.jsx. So make sure that you provide the extension for this file as a JSX, because we are going to write a JSX code within this file. Next here let's use a functional component to create a React component. So here export default and then function. Let's give component name as hello world. So make sure that the first letter of the component name should be a capital, and then just return some HTML code. So here h1 and then hello world. Perfect. Now we have created hello world functional component. Next let us import this component in a app component. So go to app.jsx file, and here go to return statement, and this is basically a fragment. Within a fragment just use hello world component, and make sure that you import this hello world component at the top. Alright, perfect. Next save this file and go to browser, and here you can see hello world is displayed in a web page. So this is how we create a React application using Vite, and this is how we create a functional component in a React project, and we import and use in a app component. Alright, Great. I hope you understood how to create a React application step by step using Vite build tool. Alright, so Vite is basically faster and it improves the development experience. So now onwards you can go ahead and use Vite tool to create the React application. Alright, great. I will see you in the next video.